What's going on? This is TJ Murphy, and welcome to another episode of Adventurous Entrepreneurs. My guest today is Dan Tocchini. Dan is a seasoned expert in transforming leadership teams and enhancing team dynamics across a variety of sectors. With over 35 years of experience, Dan has collaborated with high-profile organizations such as ESPN, Microsoft, and Interstate Batteries, as well as impactful nonprofits like Homeboy Industries. Known for his no-nonsense approach to leadership development, Dan specializes in creative conflict resolution, courageous leadership, and strategic restructuring. His methods are clear-cut and effective, devoid of any pixie dust. Dan believes that no conversation is too difficult and no situation too conflicted for a leader with a clear vision. Just a few of the golden takeaways Dan and I get into in this episode are insights from ESPN, Disney, and beyond. Mastering conflict and communication, trust, curiosity, and the key to healthy relationships, the art of work-life integration, and turning personal struggles into professional strengths. So, without further ado, this is me and Dan Tocchini. Welcome to the Adventurous Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, TJ Murphy. Since quitting my corporate 9-to-5 and starting a business while backpacking through Asia back in early 2017, I've had the privilege of learning from some incredibly adventurous entrepreneurs. Through these conversations and my own journey, I've learned that much like in life, entrepreneurship is an adventure. On this podcast, I explore the journeys of top-performing leaders in their fields. These wide-ranging conversations include tactical business advice, how I built this insights, lessons in leadership, life hacks, travel stories, favorite hobbies, and insights into living a purposeful and joy-filled life. Adventures await us, so let's dive in. Hey, Dan, welcome to Adventurous Entrepreneurs.
Thanks, TJ. Great being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really excited for the conversation. So let's give people a little bit of background on your story, on the journey. Can you tell us a little bit of your story leading up to becoming the adventurous entrepreneur you are today, and what initially drove you to the field of leadership development and team transformation?
Well, entrepreneurially, I grew up, my grandfather was an entrepreneur, came over from the old country to escape fascism. And he was an adventurer, man. He did business in Russia and all over the world.
Wow.
But he ended up opening the first talking motion picture theater north of San Francisco. And he had grocery stores and like that. And I guess he built real estate, and he built a movie theater for some guys back east. They never showed up. After he built it, they didn't show up for the opening. So he opened it, and he liked it so much. He sold his grocery stores and got in the movie business. And he was a original trailblazers for as a riding club in the Sierras. He was there. He was on the original board of Universal Studios. He was just all over the place. He was very adventurous and grew up like that. In fact, when I wanted to go to college, he said, "Why do you want to go to college? You have a business, my dad took the business and developed it into quite I think he's in the top 10 or 12 movie circuits, theater circuits in the country. So my whole family, my brother has online, on-screen advertising.
Yeah.
I got very interested in, my mother was a schizophrenic, manic depressive. So I spent a lot of time going between her. I was the oldest, and I seemed to be able to communicate with her when a lot of the family was freaked out or couldn't understand her. And I ended up going between her. And in doing so, I started reading at a young age just to try to connect with her. And I picked up all kinds of interesting stuff. I think my first book was Gestalt Therapy verbatim at 12, and then just started reading stuff on neurolinguistic programming, anything I could find that was a breakthrough. And she really lived a good life after the initial, episodes that she had. And but I was really deeply started getting into human transformation and performance. But that wasn't until after I got deep into it, after I went through a cocaine addiction and, got clean about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And that whole process threw me deeper into it, because I had been reading up into that point, and then, failed tremendously in my own personal life. A lot of it tied into the trauma of my mother and raising kids, that kind of stuff. But I realized at a young age that if something was going to happen that I wanted to have happen, I was going to have to lead it into existence. It was either, if it is to be, it's up to me, was my old motto as a kid.
Yeah.
And so I really got into that and really got involved with teams. I got involved in the human potential movement back in the late 70s, right through the 80s, learned a bunch of stuff there, and got to working with, I started a company called The Coaching Company with a friend back in 1982. It was just
Wow.
it was a little early. Talking to executives about coaches then was like, why I'm not an athlete. And
Yep.
I remember thinking to myself, I remember telling them, well, because I played ball in college, and if you go to play college or football in the pros, you get on the team. First thing they do is they assign a running coach to you, a lifting, all kinds of conditioning coaches, etc. Because it helps to have another set of eyes. There's something that goes on in that relationship. So back then I got into coaching and did it for years. And that eventually got me into organizations where I started working with teams. And I played a lot of team sports. So I think that contributes a lot of it to it too, but got
Yeah.
deep into leadership and what it means to develop a team and a culture of leadership, that kind of thing.
Well, the things that stand out to me, like the family experience, but your own lived experience that
Yeah.
really led you into having that philosophy. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. If I'm going to make transformation, I've got to take these lived experiences that I want to change and make something out of them. And it
Yeah.
sounds like you were way ahead of your time back then. I mean, now high performers, we look at coaching as it's a necessary thing to invest in. We've got coaches for everything. My
Everything.
wife is getting ready to get up on stage in a couple weeks. She's got a public speaking coach she's working
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
Anything like that, you can really niche into it. But back then, as you're describing,
Nobody.
nobody. It was probably crickets. So
Well,
how?
Tony Robbins was probably, I really like Tony. And
Oh,
I read everything he
how could you
wrote,
not?
right? And he was
Yeah,
interviewing all these people. And I'm thinking, yeah, I would read everything he wrote, anything he put out on tape, just because he was so curious and such a great interviewer. And I learned
yeah.
so much from him. So that, I think he was probably the trailblazer in that end.
No, it truly was, truly was. So given that it was crickets. There wasn't a whole lot of people
Yeah.
saying, "Yep, sign me up." How did you know, or was there a memorable moment early on in those early days that really confirmed you were on the right path?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
when did you have that aha moment?
I had developed a leadership training, and I was doing it around the country, and people were volunteering to be on the teams and stuff. And I did this training, and there was the senior director of HR for ESPN was in the training,
Cool.
and she was so moved. She said, we're putting out basically you should answer this letter, to put a letter of intent to come help us restructure our finance department. We're basically gonna have somebody come in and do it. You should apply. So I did it. I applied, and it was an interesting thing. They had us spend like 3 or 4 hours with this finance team and look through their processes and listen to them and interview them and then come up with a proposal. And there were 3 companies. I was the third one they had do it. And I remember coming in, I was supposed to meet with the CFO, and she just resigned. Fantastic woman. But they had, at the time, she had just come on, and she's tough, she's a tough executive. They called her the Dragon Lady. And
The dragon lady.
I had been interviewing the staff. And after I got through, I realized, well, I wrote a 2-page summary on it, and I brought it in with me, and I laid it on the desk next to the other 2 consulting firms that had a 10-page and a 20-page summary. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm out of here. They're never going to take me. And so she sat down, she goes, before I read your paper, I'll read it when you leave. Can you tell me, give me, what do you think the issue is? And I remember thinking to myself, well, and I told her this, I said, I really want this work, but I want it on the right basis, because if I don't tell you the truth and you hire me, then I'm going to be solving something that's not there. So I'm just going to tell you, I think you're the problem. And sat up in her desk and she said, tell me more. And so I kind of went through how
Wow.
she had all these great MBAs from all these top schools and she's treating them transactionally and they came to create something. They have all these legacy processes that probably need to be revamped and reinvented for, where they were now. And she wasn't listening to them. Anyway, she gave me the job on the spot. And I ended
You
up,
cut the head off the dragon
yeah,
lead.
and I was blown away. And then she invited me in to do, it was the most I ever got paid for a gig. She paid me 20 grand to do a 4-hour session on enrollment, on sales, negotiation sales, with the international team. And in the middle of it, I'm in the middle of this argument with one of the executives about an issue. And she stood up and she said, if we got this one issue, we'd be profitable next year. Because they weren't profitable yet at that time in the international division. So, and I was there for 10 years, but it dawned on me at that moment that, okay, we can do this. I can do this. And so I had done a lot of leadership work prior to that with LifeSpring, which is a human potential kind of training company like Landmark is now. This was before Landmark. And I worked with them for a while and did a lot of leadership work there. So I was naturally prone and I had a bunch of materials. So I was able to put leadership stuff together. And I spent 8 years as a contractor at ESPN. They turned me into Disney. I developed some curriculum for the Disney University out there in Orlando. Did a bunch of coaching, did a bunch of stuff on leadership and also on negotiation and sales. And then I got into Microsoft and, it was all referrals, people going from one company to another or knowing executives, and they would refer me. And today I'd say 90% of my work and our work at TNG is by referral because of the impact we make. So.
Well, that's a great lead in. I mean, you've worked with such influential brands and some of the biggest leaders at those brands. So let's get into the tactical stuff. You talk a
Sure.
lot about that conflict is the yellow brick road to success. This is a
Yeah.
metaphor I stumbled across in my preparation. Could you explain that metaphor and
Yeah.
perhaps share an example from your work?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So um, so I read a book when I was a young guy in this process by Jack Welch. And Jack was saying, that he knew he had a successful day by the number of difficult conversations, conflicted conversations he successfully navigated. And so I took that to heart and I really started to study conflict, which is part of negotiation and mediation, but just study conflict and what the principles are, like what's the gravity of conflict and what are the things I need to be aware of and navigate when I get into conflict or when a team is in conflict. And that really pressed me into the work that I'm doing. It pressed me into developing frameworks that I could presence, and then I could teach others to presence. It's one thing to know a framework. It's another thing to be able to presence it, right? It's not enough just to know it. I've got to be able to know how to, in a specific context, bring forth that presence that would open up possibilities. So the yellow brick road thing is, I don't know if you've ever read any of the Stoics, but the obstacle is the way.
Yeah.
And that really is what that means. It's like the obstacle, the thing that's between you and what you say you want, actually contains the provision for what you want to get done. And you won't find it unless you're willing to get in there and do the forensics and look for the nuances that will open up the next step, right? That'll bring resource where you didn't think there was resource. And it's not, it's again, it's not a formula. It's more of a principle that if you adhere to it, the principles that are in it, you'll start to find resource that you can use for what it is you long for, what you're looking to produce. And so in that way, and I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please. I think that'll help people kind of wrap their heads around this concept because there's so much value
So
here.
it's a personal example. You know,
Yeah.
I talked about being a cocaine addict before my son was born, and right before he was born, I got clean and I got clear with my wife and went through rehab, and I had I had also committed adultery. It was just a mess, you could
Yeah.
imagine, and I had confessed it, and she, forgave me, but didn't know if she wanted to stay with me, which I was prepared for.
Yeah.
And I said to her, look, we're going to be tied, we're going to be connected with Danny. He's our boy and for the rest of our lives. So I want to create at least a respectful, honorable relationship with you so that we can love him and still be good friends. And she said, yeah, I'm all for that. So we agreed to sleep in separate rooms in the house and talk. So I worked during the day. I'd go and work in the training business I was in,
Yep.
the human potential. And I would meet with her in the morning and we'd chat.
Mhm.
And then I'd go to work, come back, and we'd play with Danny at night. And so after about a month or two of this, I started meeting with her, and I was concerned because we had just bought a home. I wasn't quite making enough to make the payment, and we were clipping away at our savings. So I was asking her if there was something she could do to support. And we'd start to argue. And I'd say, well, you don't want to help? She goes, no, I didn't say I didn't want to help. And we'd argue back and forth. And I stormed out of the house, got in my car, went down to my office to teach people how to communicate, of all irony.
Yep.
And I'd come home that night and we didn't talk. We just played with Danny. We didn't want to, get
Yeah.
it all worked out. Next morning, same thing, only this time I stormed out earlier. And so that night, we played with Danny, went to bed. The next morning I get up, she's got a tape recorder on the counter. And I go, what's that for? And she goes, well, we're not communicating and you just storm out. I thought maybe we could, have the recorder doesn't have an opinion. It could feed back to us what we
Wow.
need to hear because we're not hearing each other. And I thought,
That's brilliant.
and she's like, Mr. Trainer. So she knows me pretty well. If you challenge me, I'm in, right? So I'm like, okay, turn that thing on. So we start talking, and in no time, we're arguing. And I'm getting ready to blow out again. And she goes, stop. Don't go throw a tantrum. Let's see what the tape recorder said. So she runs it back.
Replay.
That's right.
Replay.
It's like take a do-over.
Yeah.
So, she runs it through, and I'm saying, well, yeah, we've talked about this, but you really haven't answered me. If we keep going like this in 9 or 10 months, we're going to be out of savings. And she said, well, Dan, I said, and on the recorder, she says, I said, I'm willing to help. I'm just not willing to put Danny in a daycare. And then I said, see, you don't want to help. You don't care. And she said, and then I thought to myself, she started crying, and I thought, oh, she's trying to manipulate me. I mean, this is what's going on in my head.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I'm thinking, because I'm a street guy, I grew up in the street, and the things I was doing were in the street. So I'm thinking, okay, she's trying to con me. I'll just see. I'll test her. So if you were going to do something, what would you do, right? And she pulled out a 2-page business plan for a daycare in our home. And she had numbers, and it would more than adequately make up the difference. And I was stunned. I thought, she is not who I thought she was.
Yeah.
Who did I think she was? I was projecting onto her my own shiftiness, my own, I thought she was trying to get revenge because how could she forgive me for what I've done? And so I was suspicious with no evidence. And it really opened up a lot of great conversations for us. But that conflict, by going into it and understanding it, was only about a week later. I got home one night, and on my bed was a note saying, come back to bed, I forgive you, and I want to stay married. And we started having some of the best conversations of our lives. And what I was interested in is understanding her, because I realized up to that point, all I understood about her was what she did for me. And I was taking her for granted and contemptuous, all the things that destroy a relationship where I was in. So it really broke open a possibility. And I've seen that happen in so many professional environments where you sit down, you have a conversation, and you have trust is really what, if you want to know the best, in my experience, the best expression of trust is that when you betray me, I'm curious about what happened. What did I
Mm,
miss? What could I have provided? What was wanted and needed? That's all Eileen was doing. She
yeah.
was looking at, how do I get this guy to listen? Rather than, how do I get this guy to pay for not listening to me?
Mm,
Right? That takes trust to stay on the vision of connecting and not protecting yourself and continuing to get curious until you really know who's over there.
yeah. That level of introspection and fostering that habit of being curious, even
Yeah.
in those tough conversations. It's such an important thing to actually build as a skill set in marriage and business and all relationships.
Oh,
But I think it's one of the hardest things for anyone to master unless you're just out of the womb gifted like that. So what have you, I mean, you had your own experience and it sounds like that conversation and the tape recorder was a huge pivotal moment in that. But when you go to train executives or anyone that you lead and they're trying to break through and you're trying to get them to learn that skill, what's some of the stuff that they can do or look to within their experiences to get better at
so tactically, so I just met with a private equity firm there. That business is in a lot of turmoil right now.
it? Mm-hmm.
Much like the VC market was many years ago when they lost 1/3 of the VCs. They're up against a lot. It's hard to raise money, et cetera. And one of the things we noticed was that it was a partnership of 5 different uh, partners. And these guys, and they do really well, but things are drying up, so it gets contentious. And
Yeah.
when you're really doing well or you're doing poorly, that's when you see the flaws in the relationship start to show up. And they weren't communicating, and they didn't think they had one partner in particular they weren't communicating well with. And they reluctantly hired us because they heard we were really good, but they thought what they were up against was impossible.
Of
And
course.
and 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 at first, it kind of seems like that. I remember when I opened it up, I told them it's going to get worse before it gets better. But it will get better if you follow some simple principles. And I think the first one is, you talked about being curious. Being curious is a way to take responsibility for what you want to have happen, right? So if I'm committed to connecting with you and we're at odds, if I'm committed to that connection, it behooves me to be curious about what it is that I experience being disconnected from with you. What is that, and how can we have that conversation? So the first thing I do is I had these guys talk about, I said, look, you all have issues, things with each other. Here's what I'd like you to do. A little homework. I want you to write down the issue as clearly as you can. State it in a sentence or two. Boom, here's the issue. And then I want you to think of an example where you can say, and this is where it happened, so they can see what you mean. And then I want you to think about, and I want them to do all this before they even have the conversation. So the third step, I want you to talk about how you feel and what you tend to automatically do when this comes up. Right? So what are your feelings and what do you tend to do when it comes up? And then I want you to communicate, write down how you've contributed to the issue you say you want to solve. Right? Like
I love this.
what part did you have to do with it? Was it something you did or didn't do? But whatever you did that you think, anything you can identify that contributed to the problem, I want you to state that, right? And then I want you to talk about what you think is at stake if it continues. Like, write that down. What happens if you and I stay in this contentious, polarized relationship for the next 9 months, year? What's coming down the road? What do you think is going to happen? I want you to write that out, and I want you to be specific about it. And then I want you to write down, no matter what the other person does. So if I'm talking to you, no matter what you do in this conversation, what am I committed to? Where do I stand? Like, how am I going to be with you no matter how you are. And then I would put down, write about what you would like to do to remedy it. What do you think's wanted and needed? And then if I have all that prepared, when I sit down with you, I can, if you interrupt it, that's okay. I can go there and come back to my notes.
Yeah.
And I could have a very thoughtful conversation, and I'll probably learn a ton, which will influence how I think what things should go if I really learn. And you'll probably learn too when you see I'm in good faith.
Man.
So
I mean,
that's key, man. All that.
yeah, I mean, just thinking about, if we're getting ready for a big sales meeting or anything pivotal, we're going to put in the prep time, right? We're going to practice. We're going to get our thoughts put together. We're going to make sure we've practiced. We've got everything perfectly ready to go. But more often than not, when we're in difficult conversations, whether that's with a business partner or with our spouse, we don't do it. We react in the moment. We say, "Oh, you always do this. This is what always happens."
Yeah.
We don't have those layers to really peel back and also articulate how it makes us feel and how we're responsible and complicit in some of these things and what we think is going to happen in the future if it
Right on.
continues. I love that process.
Yeah. And if I'm prepared for it, I might learn even more about how I contributed as I listen, right? But I've got to be honest and open and open-handed, open and reflective about what you have to say. I want to be clear about where I'm at and open and reflective on what you have to say and how that might influence where I'm at.
It's amazing. So a little bit of a pivot here, but another thing, kind of following the yellow brick road metaphor, I also came across the saying that I've seen you bring out a lot, which is that we are all criminally minded. And
Yeah.
I'm very curious about this one. Can you unpack that a little bit in terms of what does that mean and
So,
how does it fit into the context of leadership and team dynamics?
well, I did a lot of work I did a lot of work with gangs, kids
Yeah.
coming out of gangs and coming into community. I did a lot of work with adults coming out of prison and reentry. And I don't see much difference between the people I work with in prison and the people I work with outside. We're all criminal.
Hmm.
Just some of us are more arrestable than others. And we know when we're criminal. Like I was criminal with my wife, not just because of the, lies and adultery that I had committed, but also the lies I was telling myself about who she was that I was unaware of,
Hmm.
which would make me be criminal toward her. I was suspicious of her, which criminals that, notice suspicion is the apprehension of evil with little or no evidence.
Yeah.
And that really predisposes you in the relationship, right? So if I'm suspicious of you, I'm not going to entreat you very generously. I'm going to be very, very scarce and protected and guarded. And that's going to probably trigger you wondering what I'm up to. Right. And it's going to, at the very least, you're probably going to pull back, which I'll use as evidence that you can't be trusted. Like, why is he pulling back? But because I'm unaware of how I'm actually contributing to a self-fulfilling, prophecy, a bias that I have towards you. And I project it onto you when my way of being could be very well engaging you or hooking you to protect yourself because you're not quite sure where I'm at. So we have so many ways, so many mechanisms that get in our way. And that's why when we train leadership, we train self-mastery first. Because if I can't lead myself, I'm never going to lead you adequately. I could probably, if I have the position, I might be able to extort you or, command and control in a way that eventually you're going to leave and be burned out, not trust me, but I'll get some results, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
management, that happens. People can get results using those tactics, but in the long run, they end up backfiring and you pay with penalties and interest.
Absolutely. Would you say that internal mastery as a leader is one of the hallmarks that you see in generative cultures, companies with generative cultures versus survival cultures?
Oh yeah. It, Mastering yourself is being generative.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm I've got to, and that requires looking ahead, planning, budgeting, if you will, budgeting your resources, which includes you, budgeting how much you can say yes to, which means saying no to somebody else is saying yes to this, right? So budgeting how you use yourself as a resource, budgeting your finances, budgeting, the time, your team's time. Don't waste people's time. Like, how can I make the most out of the time I have with you here in this call? Like,
Yeah.
those are the things that I think we don't often think about when we're dealing with a team and when we're working with, one another. And we get in our own way. I mean, most of this is leadership is getting yourself out of the way.
Exactly.
So if you can't master yourself, you're going to be constantly tripping over things that wouldn't have been there unless you put them there, right?
Yeah.
So,
You're just getting in the way of your team at the end of the day. So you've worked with a lot of, big companies, big high functioning teams, and probably some that weren't so high functioning. Are there other hallmarks that you've come to notice and also preach in terms of building a generative culture versus that survival culture? And why should leaders strive for one versus the other?
well, yeah, there are some. So, for instance, if you don't want to hear your people, believe me, they're going to tell you one way or the other. So if you're going to look at them at tools and all, like, here's what I hear this from guys all the time. Well, I'm not a babysitter. Well, it's interesting. You're either not there or you're babysitting. There's like two extremes. Like, isn't there anything in between? Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? I mean, it's such a great excuse because it usually translates back to, I don't know how to deal with this, and I don't want them to know I don't know how to deal with this.
Yeah.
Versus, geez, I wondered if the two of us could get together and solve what we're looking at. I know it's not working for me. I wonder if it's not working for him or her. And what tends to happen is that people want to try to have warmth and empathy. They develop pretty good affinity. Most leaders do with their team.
Yep.
But they don't know how to enforce. Like, that's a paradox, right? There's the empathy we have with each other. We dig, we like working together, but now it's time I have to come or you have to come and enforce something with me. You see something's not working. Well, what generally happens is the story comes up, well, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to micromanage them, which is like, oh yeah, well, nobody said you had to manage them or micromanage them, but you could just check in and see what they're up to see if you can support them.
Yeah.
If you
Be
think
curious. Be
yes,
curious about their situation.
it looks like this is not going well. I don't know. Maybe I've got it wrong, but help me see what you see. You might have this completely handled, and I just need to get on your team. And if you don't, then maybe I can help you get, work through it. Tell me what's up. But if you're punitive, if you use command and control tactics, most people will receive that with suspicion, and they won't want to tell you what's going on because they're afraid you're going to use it against them instead of help them get educated through it. And that's a big one to break down. And by the way, that's criminal. Right? That people start acting.
Absolutely.
They start
Absolutely.
hiding things.
Things get a little shady when that's the culture.
Yeah, the employee might hide what they're going on. Meanwhile, the manager's trying to extort them into what they're supposed to be doing.
Not a good way to build a thriving team by any stretch of the imagination. That's great. Dan, as we kind of transition here, this is a podcast. We're talking business, we're talking entrepreneurship, but one of the hurdles that we all face is, how do we live a well-rounded life? How do we do the things that we set out to do, create more freedom in our lives, spend more time with our families and the people that bring us joy when we live very busy, always connected lives? So I always ask our guests, like, how do you integrate intentional living and creating more personal freedom for yourself, considering the demanding nature of your work, especially over the years when you've been involved in many things over the course of your career?
And I look at it, I call it integration, work-life integration. And I make sure that I'm a person of faith. So I take my time each week and take a Sabbath, relax, and celebrate and enjoy what I have and who I have, and grateful for it. I also spend a lot of time in nature, and I live in Idaho, and I work all over the country. But I get out, I fish many days of the year, fly fish, uh, snowmobile, hike. Those are things I like doing. I used to like to ski until I broke myself a few times, and
It happens.
at this age, I decided to back off.
Yeah.
But I do like. My wife wants me to try again this year, which it's been 20 years, 15 years.
Wow.
I broke my leg really severely a few years, many
Yeah.
years back, racing my kid down on double black.
Oh man.
But I mean, adventure is everything.
Yep.
And I think the other thing is one must, in order to create margin, one must not, you can't be too good to die. You can't be too good to suffer, right? Suffering is where I think we develop our character. I think it's where we learn, like suffering through my relationship at times with my wife, and her suffering with me and with the kids, and doing it in a good way, in a noble way, in a way that includes everyone. Like, we just lost my grandson a year and a half ago. A 2.5-year-old was killed by a tree that dropped on our house during a storm. And we spent immediately, the whole family, my son, his ex-wife, his wife, his 2 children by his first wife, my daughter, her kids, her husband, myself, my wife. We just got an Airbnb, and we spent 2 months living there, just working through what came up, looking into what we didn't want to see. And the more you can look into it, and the more you can suffer together, it's amazing, because the immediate propensity is to want to pull back and hide. And I think that happens in business. Something goes wrong and people want to pull back instead of come together and get pulled back and protect your position, instead of, hey, you know what we need to do? We need to bring all resources to the issue here and talk about it and vet it. And let's look at what are the results we have, what produced those results, what worked, what didn't work, what relationships generated those choices, what shifts, because it's interesting, these vital skills, what people call soft skills, they're vital skills that produce hard results. All action comes out of relationship. We say that all business problems are relationship problems. They're people problems. And if we can get our relationship straight, we'll find the answer. And it's amazing. We don't go in with answers to teams. We work with them to develop the answer, and then we stay with them to execute it, because they have the intelligence.
Yeah.
And the only reason they're not getting to it is because they're protecting each other from what they think the other person's going to do, or they're big political games and so on and so forth. We can break those down pretty quickly, and with language that is easy to entreat. That's the key. Can you entreat it? Yeah, that's a lot of work. Did that answer your question?
It did. It actually resonates deeply with me. My family, we just always had and especially your last words, they're kind of like protecting each other from the pain culture within my immediate family. Went through some addiction struggles, went through, some deaths and hard times. And it definitely always was kind of separate and dealing with it on our own. I love that you guys were able to get together and just live together for 2 months.
I saw
I
how
think that's a tremendous thing
when
to
my
do.
mother when my mother was ill, I wanted to get close to her, and so did my sister. But a lot of my brothers and my dad, it was just more than they wanted to deal with. And as a result, my sister and I really bonded, and my mother bonded with all of us.
Yeah.
Eventually, everybody got into it, but initially, my sister and I really bonded because we went toward it. And I've just seen teams do the same thing. Instead of when a team gets together and is willing to address the most difficult issues and really hold in, it's amazing what they can do together. And what happens? They want to come to work. They learn stuff at work that they can take home with them, right? Like this is the kind of thing that benefits everybody, no matter what. These are skills that if you practice them, they bring dividends. And if you don't, they dissipate, because they're learned skills. And if you don't practice them, you lose them. Like a language.
100%. The takeaway there for me is, building a culture within your team, within your family, within your relationships to lean in when times get
Yeah,
tough, not pull back.
not
I
pull
think
back.
that's a tremendous skill set for any leader to develop and be able to facilitate and build that culture around within their teams. So thank you for sharing that, Dan.
Yeah.
And as we kind of move to wrap up here, I have a lighter question. I call it my choose your own adventure question. So keeping with the theme here. So you can pick which one you'd like to answer or both if you so desire. But the first would just be, what's a favorite place that you love to visit? You just love going back there. Maybe you've only been there once, maybe you keep going time and time again, but a favorite place. And second would just be, a recent trip you went on, whether that was with your family, with a friend. And in either case, what was it like? What made it so memorable? Who were you with? Maybe a favorite meal or drink you had, a lesson learned. Give us a story.
Let's see. The first one is, uh, what was the first question? Is it where you
Just
like to
a
go place?
favorite place
Yeah,
that you
there's a
love to visit.
waterfall. There's a waterfall on the back of on the back of Bend, uh, Bachelor. There's a waterfall that comes down there, and I don't know the name of it, but
Tumalo Falls.
Tumalo Falls.
Yeah, Tumalo Falls.
That's a power spot for me.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, I used to go there whenever I was troubled when I was younger, and I would just sit and get under those falls and just sit there. I bring my lunch in there. I brought my wife there. I brought friends, but that is a power spot for me.
That's awesome. I love
Yeah,
that. I love that that's what you said. It
yeah,
is incredibly beautiful. I live
yeah.
here in
I
Bend
was going to
for
say
everyone
Tumalo, but I
listening.
didn't know if it was. I didn't know if that was the falls. I just remember for me, it was like being in the womb in that place.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of great waterfalls, but that one is probably the most spectacular. And it's great because there's trail systems and you can
Yeah,
get up and there's even more waterfalls up
up
beyond it.
above
You
it.
can
Yeah,
you can bike for miles and miles and
yeah.
miles and connect back into like the Bachelor system. And
Yeah,
it's
I love
just it's
and then
beautiful.
those hikes between the sisters, a
Yeah.
thousand lakes. I mean, that's my one of my favorite parts of the country. And
Yeah.
then
It
one of the
is.
best trips I ever took was I did two trips. One I took just recently with my son to Colombia. I had some stem cells put in, needed to, and
Okay.
we just hung out for a week, which was a blast in Colombia, and just
Yeah.
got to enjoyed the culture and the food and hung out together and talked. We do a lot of work together, and then I went on a bachelor trip with my partner Adrian, his bachelor party.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Anchorage and we watched the opening of the Iditarod. We
Wow.
snowmobiled for 8 hours one day into a glacier, and
Oh my gosh.
it was awesome. And then we ice fished. It was a blast. We were only there 3 days, and we just packed it out and had a blast. And it was four of us, and we played hearts at night, and it was just great being
Yes.
together. And
Oh,
it stuck with me. That's about 3 years ago. It was really great.
oh, that sounds like the adventure of a lifetime. I love that. I actually just got back from a bachelor party for one of my best friends that lives here in Bend. We road tripped out to St. George, Utah, and
Oh yeah.
took his side by side. He's a big off-road guy. So we did one ski day at Bryan Head. We did 2 days in Zion and
Oh
then
man.
2 full days, like 8 hours ripping around on side by sides, rock crawling,
Oh, the
rolling through the
best.
dunes, climbing up to waterfall. It was just an incredible trip. I'd never spent any time in Utah. So it planted to see. There's so
Yeah,
much
St.
adventure to
George
be
is
had.
gorgeous, and the lakes and
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. So we'll definitely be going back there. But thank you for sharing your story, Dan. That's incredible. And as we wrap up, for listeners who are navigating their own leadership challenges, short and sweet, something to leave people thinking about. Could you offer one piece of advice for making their teams a little more magical?
Well, stand, stand for something, and when it
Yeah,
fails, stand. Don't stop. Stand for what you believe in, and you will attract it. It will happen. But be willing to suffer. Be willing to be recognized. But stand. If that's the only thing that orders chaos is a stand.
great way to end it. Just stand up for something
Yeah.
and live by that and make it known. You got to make
Yeah,
it
make it
known.
known. Be willing to be shot at. It's okay. You'll
Yeah.
get stronger. As Nietzsche says, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you
Makes you
stronger.
stronger. Makes you stronger. All right, Dan, where can people find and support you online? If they want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best place to do that?
We have a podcast called the Naked Leadership Podcast.
Yep.
And we're actually, there's 200 episodes, and we just did our last podcast until the fall. We're doing some expansion work into enterprise, but there's 200 episodes, and we use it with a lot of, in fact, we have clients who use it on their interview process, the whole thing. So there's a bunch there. TakeNewGround.com. And if you go to the bottom of the website, there's a free book I wrote when I was doing change work at ESPN. It's called The Change Imperative. And it just kind of acquaints leaders with what they can expect when they start to implement a change, both on the team and with their, with themselves, et cetera, the dynamics.
Yeah.
And then I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn. Dan
Awesome.
Tocchini.
And we're going to put links to all of those in the show notes, so it'll be easy for everyone to find. Dan, this has been so value packed for me personally. So I know there will be other people with questions and lots of takeaways here. So thank you for joining me. And I look forward to continuing to follow your journey and learning from you.
Well, thank you, TJ. I really enjoyed meeting you. What an honor. And man, it's good to know there are guys like you standing out there, man. Really.
Likewise. Well, if you ever make it out to Bend, we'll have to connect.
Oh, you can count on it. I'm just down the road. I'm only 5 hours away.
Yes, sir.
All right, man.
To all of our Adventurous listeners, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Please be sure to subscribe, download, and share this on social media or with someone you know will get some value from it. Leaving a review goes a long way in helping people find the show, and I personally appreciate reading them when they come in. So please go drop one if you have the time. We'll see you all next week, and remember, whether we're talking about business or the things that bring us joy outside of work, life is meant for exploring. So go out there and live it one adventure at a time.